Stephen King, RLSTINE, Christopher Pike. Different writers, different styles. Their respective names probably conjure different feelings. Distaste for one, maybe, and enthusiasm for another. You might nostalgically recall Pike's focus on his brooding teen characters, or Stine's stories that read like verbal amusement park rides. You may prefer King's comfortable, folksy narration, his loose plots that might tighten with sudden terror or spool out to disappointing denouements. But regardless of their differences, these prolific brand behemoths of horror, and the horror adjacent, share an important quality in common. They each write pulp fiction. Pulp fiction, you might protest. That sounds like an insult. Sure, stories about haunted cars aren't quite literary feats on par with the Odyssey, but that doesn't make them bad. Heck, I actually found them very entertaining. And that's where I have to stop you, dear viewer, because I have to completely agree with you. This video isn't to shame these men for their pulp fiction, but to extol it, and enthusiastically. They understand the value of entertainment for its own sake, and no series better exemplifies that ethos, I think, than Stine's classic 90s run of young adult thrillers, Fear Street. Now, as successful as those books were, our Mensch RL is better known for a little series called Goosebumps. And this is a shame. Even keeping in mind these two series were written for different audiences, it's hard not to conclude Fear Street surpassed Goosebumps in every way. The stakes were higher, the tension tauter, the plots immeasurably better woven. And okay, the characters had all the dimensionality of movie posters, but at least they were printed in color this time. What's so special about them, though? As anyone who's read more than a few knows, their list of flaws could easily exceed their virtues. So often, the narrative surprises less by cleverly outfoxing the reader, and more by relying on a cheap or downright bizarre twist, which, while at least superficially logical, has virtually no way of being predicted, unless you're very familiar with Stine's bag of tricks. As mentioned before, the characters have the substance of Pop-Tarts, and the kind with no icing. There's just not a lot there. Most people in the Fear Street universe have one or two defining qualities, and perhaps a compulsion, horrible secret, traumatic past, or long-lost twin to round out their rote existence. The occasional villain that stands out in his or her respective book doesn't linger in your memory, and even fewer protagonists seize the limelight. Unlike even Goosebumps, Fear Street doesn't boast a roster worthy of a fighting game. And if you're out there, Scholastic, you're welcome for the idea. Monster Blood, The Mummy, Spidey and the Camera, The Cuckoo Clock, The Mud Monsters, The Witch Who Gives Wishes, Curly, The Creeps, the list goes on. What does Fear Street offer in comparison? Nothing much. In fact, I'd argue the main villain of Fear Street is right in the title. The street isn't a person, but it's certainly a character, with a history and personality. The town it's in, too, Shadyside, shares prominence in the series, but historically, asphalt has rarely proved a compelling villain, and ranch house neighborhoods strike fear only in the hearts of ambitious architects. Fear Street doesn't have much in the way of thematics either. This isn't the series for particularly thoughtful ruminations on the human condition, though there are a couple books that do achieve the rare moment of poignancy. By and large, the books don't make you think, and aren't designed to do so. You might remember an exquisite meal at your city's finest 5-star restaurant for years afterwards, but you forget the bag of chips you ate while lounging on the couch watching Netflix about 5 minutes after eating it. Maybe there's a brief reminder a couple hours later. Similarly, save a few exceptions, all Fear Street books bleed together in the memory. They leave a distinct aftertaste as a whole, but are so similar they lack individuality. Stine sticks to a formula that allows little deviation, and while this can redound to his favor by giving his readers clear expectations for the stories, turning them into a sort of literary comfort food, a role which shouldn't be dismissed, this formula also means the books can't aspire to anything higher, and risk becoming too rote and predictable to regular readers as they catch on to recycled plot elements and character templates. None of that says a word about the prose either. This can vary a bit across books, but in the typical Fear Street novella, you can expect sentence fragments, thread-worn descriptions, and general lack of anything novel or showy. Ostentatious, Stine is not. So, if Fear Street boasts thin characters, goofy twists, banal or non-existent themes, and substandard prose, what does it offer? Isn't this enough to disqualify it as a series of note? What can be said about this written equivalent of popcorn? This literary Little Caesars hot and ready pizza. Yes, I'm trying to make you hungry. I'm starting to make myself hungry. Well, what can be said about popcorn? It's light, fluffy, buttery, and delicious in the simplest way. It can be eaten before meals, after meals, or as a meal. You don't need to think much about it except when a craving strikes you, and while it's not outright bad for you, many regard it as a guilty pleasure. What an apt comparison for Fear Street. The truth is, the series gets much more right than it gets wrong. The plots can stretch credulity to the breaking point, but they're fundamentally entertaining. Stine employs every tactic a thriller writer can use to keep his audience guessing and involved. Dramatic cliffhangers at the end of every chapter, multiple red herrings in every book, hidden and stolen identities, secret motivations, lost memories of which only fragments remain, visceral, quick language that draws you instantly into the scene, protagonists desperate to uncover the truth despite personal cost, and an incompetent or elusive law enforcement that can never keep up with the amount of bizarre crime Shadyside seems to spawn. The characters, simple though they be, are fun. There's something wonderfully escapist about diving in to observe small-town teens in the 90s, confront stalkers and killers, cultists, and the occasional werewolf. I mean, Buffy was a hit for many reasons, but this was definitely one of them. The atmosphere and setting is cozy, providing the perfect backdrop for suspense, cheap thrills, and horrible creative deaths. Some people enjoy British whodunits, set amid dreary skies, pompous accents, quiet wit, and tea times. I prefer an American town, summer and winter vacation excursions, and impulsive young people, beset by their mean-spirited peers, and entrapped by sinister or indifferent adults. Give me a wild universe of sex, stabbings, and gruesome secrets, where everyone dies young and leaves a beautiful corpse, over a world of complacent busybodies who think themselves too clever to laugh aloud. Fear Street is unsubtle and unrelenting, and I wouldn't have it any other way. In fact, its most obvious narrative predecessor isn't just the written thriller, but the movie slasher. Fear Street deftly combines the best qualities of both. From the slasher, it takes the quarreling small-town kids, the helpless and mostly female protagonists, the looming sense of inevitability as characters are picked off in the shadows, and the playful atmosphere of free-spirited abandon in which anything might occur and everything goes. From the proper thriller, it borrows a steady escalation of suspense, a constant uncertainty about the identity and motive of the killer, a series of clues and red herrings, and a general avoidance of gore or shocking graphic violence as a centerpiece, though it's certainly present in the stories. The result is consistently entertaining, and to a degree beyond that of the typical film slasher. Many of those have even thinner characters and virtually zero tension. No one comes to care enough about the people involved to feel their emotions in the scenes intended to provoke anxiety. In fact, the characters often die off so quickly in succession, the suspense is never allowed a chance to build, and the audience never grows attached to what exists of their personalities. I would even venture to assert that Fear Street has no televisual equivalent. It's a particular blend of genre unique to literature, and save a theoretical movie or two I haven't seen that may share a similar structure, there's nothing like this series. It's actually a shame. I think the quick, fun pace, and often visually striking scenes would translate very well to the screen. One could easily imagine an entertaining Fear Street film, so long as the appropriate book was chosen for source material. In fact, they're reportedly creating one, but given what Hollywood has done to beloved franchises in recent history, I'm not holding my breath for astounding quality. Personally, I think Fear Street would work better as a streaming series, with each book comprising 2-hour-long episodes. It puzzles me no one at development companies has seen this opportunity yet. Fear Street was not as earth-shattering of a success as, well, its successor, Goosebumps, but it was still a staple of many millennial literary diets, and established Stine as one of the preeminent young adult authors of the time. There would absolutely be a market for these adaptations, especially as we exit the heyday of the 80s nostalgia and move decidedly into the time for 90s revival. Decade nostalgia seems to run on intervals of 25 to 30 years. Think Happy Days glamorizing the 50s and the 70s, Dazed and Confused recalling the 70s and the 90s, and now shows like Stranger Things, amid many other pieces of media, beating to death the 80s and the 2010s. This is natural, as a new generational cohort comes into their own spending power, carrying a fresh set of fond memories for corporations to exploit. Of course, there's little chance the show would become a runaway hit. The young adult market was a different beast back in the 90s. Non-serialized series fiction reigned, which meant a more decentralized environment. Until Harry Potter exploded on the scene, there was no must-read series that you were socially expected to be familiar with. Sure, Goosebumps kind of filled that role in elementary school, but for those 12 to 14, not really. Animorphs had a serial format, but could still be read out of order, and with over 54 regular books, plus special editions, very few kids read them all. As television moved away from standalone episodes in the 90s and towards serialization, The X-Files being at the vanguard of this shift, children's literature did the same. Harry Potter married the series format with an overarching plotline that kept kids and young adults, and even actual adults, coming back for succeeding volumes. It was such a mammoth hit that it sucked up all the oxygen and eventually put the nail in the coffin for non-serialized series. Following Harry Potter was one young adult smash hit serial after another, the biggest being Twilight and The Hunger Games, not to mention more niche brands, like A Series of Unfortunate Events. These titles dominated the space, and proved lucrative properties in all forms of media. Fear Street did not fall into this category, so it's not a complete shock it hasn't yet made the leap to film or television. It never captured enough eyes to rival Goosebumps, and it certainly came nowhere close to the success of the serialized fiction coming after it. Regardless, I believe there's a real audience for it, even beyond the original cadre of fans who read the series back in the 90s. Its unique qualities means it could have an appeal to a whole new generation of young people, who are more likely to pull up the Netflix app than grab a paperback off the shelf. Not to mention horror and mystery fans looking for something a bit different to pass the time. So, what's the future of the franchise? Uncertain, but despite my praise and ideas for expansion in this video, probably not bright. RLSTINE has written a couple new volumes, but he's focused the majority of his time on new Goosebumps books, and it's unclear if Neo Fear Street is selling enough to justify his continued work investment. Stine is getting old, and after he dies, I doubt the brand will have the steam to continue. I'm not looking forward to that sad day, but maybe it's fitting Fear Street doesn't live forever. After all, it's had a longer life than many of the kids that populated Shadyside. The most appropriate death would be a sudden loss of sales in its teen years, followed by swift cancellation. But I guess we'll have to settle for a cancer diagnosis in its 20-somethings. Not as gruesome as we'd like, but hey, you should have known there was going to be a twist. Thank you so much for watching, guys. If you have any suggestions, please comment, let me know what you think. I'm very eager to hear people's opinions of my videos. I love any feedback, positive or negative. I'm still learning. Constructive feedback is extremely helpful to me, and I love to hear different opinions. If you don't like it, hey, click the thumbs down button. Just do me a favor, if you do, leave a comment. Let me know what you thought. If you do like it, toss me a thumbs up, and that would make my day. And if you want to see more videos like it would make my week if you subscribe. Guys, this is Gum Magoo here, and I'll talk with you again soon.